We have a small family, so our gatherings are minimal. It was a wet Thanksgiving. My older sister, my mom, my two sisters, and I went to my grandparents' place for dinner. Nancy has been gone for a long time, but Jamie and I, our younger sister, and our mother all reside at home. Our grandparents are 20 minutes away, and our dead side of the family is in a separate town. Our grandmother was also bringing some food over, and we were all pitching in to help with the cooking and other tasks. Our grandparents came at approximately 5 o'clock, so we had to go outside and assist them in walking up the front stoop through the rain to make sure they didn't slide. We always had Thanksgiving dinner at 6 o'clock sharp. It was awful outside, so as soon as they arrived, we turned on the football game in the living room, and I sat with my grandparents. My grandpa was a die-hard Cowboys fan, to watch football. My sisters were assisting my mom with the food in the kitchen. At first, I went to assist prepare the table when it was time because the downpour made Thanksgiving evening cozier and more leisurely. As usual, we were all seated at the table by 6 o'clock, and for the small gathering of people, we had an enormous assortment of food. We had stuffing, lamb potatoes, cranberry sauce, and turkey legs, cornbread plus additional dishes. I probably won't remember that before moving to the living room to watch the football game, we were all seated at the table, eating, sipping wine, and chatting. The doorbell rang then, not long before the game was over. Our parents don't talk, but the possibility of our father surprising us wasn't out of the question because it was still pouring outside, and we weren't expecting anyone else. Our mother remarked, "Oh no, what if that's your father?" To cut a long story short, my mother instructed me to go see who it was. I walked to the door and yelled, "Who is it?" But the sound of a male voice on the other side was drowned out by the sound of the pouring rain on the front awning. I found a black male on the other side of the door wearing a large rain jacket with the hood up when I opened the door with the storm door still closed and secured. He approached me as I opened the door and said something through it. I had to ask him to repeat it twice before I realized he was requesting food and expressing that he was hungry. Then he added something like, "If you spare some food, the Lord will give you good karma." I answered, "Give me a moment." I went to the living room and told my mom there's a man at the front door who might be homeless or just really hungry. My grandmother urged, "Give him some food." And my mother replied, "Close the door." I promised to cook him a small paper plate meal with the leftovers. I went to the kitchen and got a bunch of paper plates so that they wouldn't get ruined by the rain outdoors, and I sandwiched some leftovers between them. The man was still standing when I got to the front door. He attempted to open the door when I held out the plate for him to see. I was already suspicious, but I cried, "Wait, it's locked." Unfortunately, even after he attempted to open the door, I managed to unlock it. He pulled it open violently as soon as I started to push it open and attempted to shove through me. I hurled the meal at once and repelled him while calling out to my sisters for assistance. I noticed two more males running up the front walkway to the door as Nancy arrived to assist with closing it. I assisted my sister in slamming the second door shut once I was able to push the man out far enough. Being the only guy in the home with physical capabilities, I felt obligated to ensure the safety of the house, so I hurried to the backyard door to confirm it was secured. Not surprisingly, my family was in fits of laughter as we discussed potential course of action. My mother phoned the police as I kept moving from window to window, trying to see outside through the pouring rain, but I was only able to do so via the backyard window. We finally decided to call the police. A couple of men were rushing across the grass toward the rear door. I assumed they attempted to open the door, but were unsuccessful. After that, I observed them running through the grass toward the gate once more before they vanished. The food I had dumped on the front stoop was still sitting there when the police arrived. Not that it wasn't evident that those guys weren't there for the food, but it's still important to bring up the fact that our Thanksgiving nearly turned into a nightmare if it weren't for my sister and I acting quickly. They were all dispersed throughout the porch. Although I am aware that my grandma had the best of intentions when it came to helping the less fortunate, and I was much impacted by her, the reality is that doing the right thing can sometimes backfire. Not too long after, we installed the doorbell camera. Thanksgiving night, I was having supper at my folks' house. My parents prepared a large meal as usual before dinner, but I received a lengthy text essay from an unknown number. We had a regular Thanksgiving celebration for our family because they were hosting this year, and I got to meet some cousins and uncles that I hadn't seen in about a year. I'll keep it private because it includes a lot of intimate information. It began, "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well." But I soon realized that the person sending the text was this crazy stalker named Kevin, who I had never even seen before. We never met, but for a while we texted and snapped after finding each other on a dating app. He started to give me obsessive vibes, and when I gently declined our date by expressing I didn't think we had much in common, he became even more aggressive and obsessive. I banned him on everything, including Instagram, Snapchat, and his number, after he even threatened me once when I shared a Snap story of my friend and I drinking drinks. However, the communication didn't end there. The same thing happens on Snapchat. I would receive random profiles adding me with different guys' names. I block these accounts every time they try to follow me on Instagram. After reading the full message, I was angry that he was gaslighting and maybe threatening me. And every time I tried to add them back out of curiosity, their Snap scores were always 0. I said, "I'll call the police if you keep contacting me." I was fine with my grandma getting irritated and asking me to put my phone away because I took so long to formulate a response. I only had to put it out of my sight and out of my mind for 30 minutes before receiving another text from an unknown number. I didn't want to use my phone and totally destroy my mood for another essay. In order to deal with this while I was with relatives, I put my phone away and made an effort to participate in the conversation. Things slowed down when family started to leave, and when I read the messages, I found something unsettling. It was longer than the first one, and it was him berating me and insulting me the entire time, acting like the entitled narcissistic sociopath that he clearly is when there was just a small amount of my family left. I showed them the texts, and they were appalled. My mom wanted me to go to the police the next day to report him for harassment, which I planned on doing. I soon left my parents' house to go home to my apartment. My apartment is the lower floor of a 2-family house. My friend Chelsea is my roommate in the apartment. When I went straight to my room to hunt for Christmas movies to watch after arriving home before her, my phone started ringing and displayed the message, "Unknown caller." I hushed my phone and denied knowing it was him. I turned on a ridiculous romantic comedy Christmas film, Surviving Christmas, to help me fall asleep. All I can recall about it is that James Gandolfini was in it. Since it was late at night, I didn't think I would finish the film. Halfway through the movie, I was starting to feel tired when I heard footsteps outside my room. The footsteps came right up to my door, so I figured it was Chelsea returning from her night out with her family because it was in the flat and not from upstairs. Then someone tried to enter my bedroom. Even though I trust Chelsea, I usually lock my bedroom door at night. It's just a habit. I paused the video and listened as the doorknob moved a few more times before yelling at Chelsea. Then it stopped. I heard soft footsteps as they left the door. Just as I was ready to call Chelsea, I noticed many texts from a third strange number appeared on my screen. The one that worried me the most was a threat that said, "It's a good thing you made your residence obvious." I made around 5 unsuccessful attempts to reach Chelsea. Instead, I called my parents repeatedly until my dad answered, at which point I whispered to him that I believed the insane stalker was living in the house. My father told me to stay put because he was coming over immediately. We only lived 10 minutes apart, but he drove here in 5 minutes. My dad and I spoke on the phone for the entire duration, and when Chelsea finally returned my call, she informed me that she would not be returning to the apartment tonight. The front door was locked when my dad arrived, so it was definitely not her. I promised him that I wasn't dreaming, so I had to let him in. After we completely destroyed the apartment, he went to the large sliding window by the kitchen, which was wide enough for anyone to fit through. When he opened it, he turned to face me and gave me a dejected look. When he discovered that I didn't close the window each night, he reprimanded me and told me, "This is how I explain how someone got in here." I followed him back home and spent that night and early morning there. My father brought me to the county courthouse, where we were given detailed instructions on how to obtain a temporary restraining order, omitting the majority of the narrative's legal proceedings. When I had to go to court to get the restraining order renewed, I eventually did see Kevin in person. The judge granted the extension, even though I was never able to establish he had broken into my flat. He sent me a lot of threatening texts, and I warned him that he would be arrested if he ever contacted me through any outlet again. This was a really dangerous individual, and I hope he hasn't found anyone else to torment with music. Near the east coast of Central Florida, in a rural area, resides the majority of my family. Even though my Uncle Ben hosted Thanksgiving one year, his house and maybe 5 other houses are situated on a large lake. And that's it. I don't want to dox my uncle by revealing the name of the town or the lake. In essence, it's not the opulent home and arrangement you may have imagined. I promise it's huge and private despite being rustic. Despite being a bit of a hillbilly, my uncle adds humor to our Christmas get-togethers. This year, he was going to go all out and make Thanksgiving feel like a party because he was hosting. We basically arrived at his house at 3 in the afternoon with music, cornhole coolers full of beers, and other wonderful stuff. We shared some munchies like chips and dip and beers, while playing drinking games like cornhole, card games, and even hoops with my cousin. Even though the basketball game ended quickly, we had 3 beers and a ton of chips by the end of the night, and we were enjoying a unique Thanksgiving celebration that lasted for several hours with loud music. I know that at 5:30, as the light began to fade, Aunt Mel and Uncle Ben began carrying the food outside to the table. They had the table set up beneath the large gazebo. The gazebo had lights, so about 6 o'clock, when it got really dark, the lights came on while we were all eating and setting things up. My uncle is probably the only person still living who insists on having Thanksgiving dinner outside, so it was essentially a complete blackout, but we all still had a great time. The good times didn't last long, though, as my cousin pointed out to the trees beyond me and said, "Dad, who's that?" Uncle Ben exclaimed, "Who the hell was this person watching us eat out in front of the woods like a statue?" As he turned around, Uncle Ben yelled, "Can I help you with something?" As he got up and went to the man who was standing near the woods, the guy turned around and sprinted into the woods when he was, I'd say, halfway there. Uncle Ben laughed as he turned around. He was clearly inebriated at this stage and was amused by it. "It must be one of the native nuts," he said. My Aunt Mel was not amused as he returned to the table to sit, and I kind of agreed with her that it was eerie. The lightheartedness of this did not continue, though, as I saw the same person again, this time closer to the lake near the trees. My dad had joked that there was nothing to worry about between all the males here. When I pointed it out to everyone, my uncle became enraged and began to storm over again, yelling and insulting the man. By this point, his inebriation was clearly beginning to show in the manner he was dealing with the trespasser. However, as Uncle Ben returned to the table, we saw that there was another guy in the woods on the exact opposite side of the yard. And as the guy Uncle Ben was approaching rushed into the woods once more, the other guy stayed put. We responded, "There's another one." So my dad, cousin, and I stood up to assist my uncle in confronting these individuals. At that point, the second man ran into the woods. We began clearing the table and taking plates and food inside to the kitchen at this point, deciding it was time to clean up. After removing everything from the pavilion, we all took seats in the living room. I know Uncle Ben and Aunt Mel were on high alert because of the creeps running about their property, so they left the lights on outside. Our established notion at the time was that it was simply some drunken older adolescents or early 20-year-olds joking around being without family gatherings, since they didn't appear like kids, which was the problem. Who would do this on Thanksgiving, we wondered. When I got up, Uncle Ben and my dad both urged me to grab another beer, which I eventually decided to grab from the cooler outside. I then stepped outside and made my way to the pavilion. When I got there, I noticed that the pavilion light was off, so I took a moment to assess my surroundings. In an attempt to avoid having to return here, I gathered as many beers as I could carry and began making my way back to the house. I glanced around when I heard one of the chairs beneath the pavilion slipping on the concrete and saw someone moving around the table beneath the pavilion. He appeared to be at least 6 feet 5 inches tall. As I was running back to the house, I started yelling for Uncle Ben. When he and my dad came outside, I said, "There's a guy over there." Suddenly, it seemed like someone else was answering, saying that there was a banging coming from the other side of the house, like someone was hitting the siding with their hand. Seeing my dad and Uncle Ben act really scared me too. Uncle Ben locked the door when we walked inside. We weren't sure how many people were outside, but we had the impression that the house was surrounded. So Aunt Mel began drawing all the curtains and blinds because we thought someone was watching us from the outside. This was the first time Uncle Ben had called the police, and it seemed very strange for him to involve the police in any way. After only 5 to 10 minutes on the phone with them, we waited in the living room where there was an obvious sense of tension and anxiety. A loud smash on the glass was heard, followed by the entire shattering of a kitchen window. Uncle Ben retorted that it hadn't been loaded in years when Aunt Mel yelled at him to go retrieve the old gun from the closet. Fortunately, the police response time was not too bad. We knew he had arrived when we heard the police cruiser outside beep once. It felt threatening since someone outside had thrown a brick through the window with a note stating "Leave now." The fact that his Trump banner was gone the following day raised the suspicion that those individuals had political motivations. That is, in fact, the most plausible theory. I don't see any other reason why my aunt's uncle and cousin's house would be the target of something like this on Thanksgiving, unless they are the worst neighbors ever in secret. Still, there are some genuinely sick people in the world.